I was 26 years old when village elders in rural Afghanistan sentenced me to stoning for alleged adultery, and I lay bleeding on the ground after dozens of rocks struck my body, left for dead as the crowd dispersed believing justice had been served. But on August 3, 2018, as I lay broken and dying from the stoning, Jesus Christ appeared to me in a vision and spoke words that began miraculous healing. And over the following hours, wounds that should have killed me closed, bleeding stopped, and I survived what no one expected me to survive, proving that Christ heals even those whom brutal justice has condemned to die. My name is Laila Ahmadi. I was born in 1992 in a small village in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. I grew up during years of war and instability, living under various controlling forces including Taliban. Life was harsh, especially for women who had minimal rights and lived under strict interpretation of Islamic law. I had limited education, completing only a few years of schooling before being kept home to learn domestic skills. At age 18 in 2010, my family arranged my marriage to Rashid, a 35-year-old farmer from our village. The marriage was difficult from the start. Rashid was harsh and controlling, and I had no say in the arrangement. I lived as most village women did, confined to home and family compounds, fully covered when going out, dependent on male permission for any activity. My world was small and controlled, with little hope for change or improvement. I accepted this as my fate, knowing nothing different. In 2017, Rashid was killed in violence that was common in our region. At 25, I became a widow, which placed me in precarious social position. Widows in our village were viewed with suspicion and had even fewer rights than married women. I lived with Rashid's family, dependent on their grudging support. Several months after Rashid's death, his younger brother Mahmoud began showing inappropriate interest in me. He would find reasons to be alone with me, make suggestive comments, and touch me inappropriately when others weren't watching. I was terrified and rebuffed his advances, but I couldn't report him without risking being blamed myself. In July 2018, Mahmoud attempted to assault me sexually when the family was away. I fought him off and escaped, but he was furious at the rejection. Within days, Mahmoud spread rumors throughout the village that I had initiated inappropriate contact with him, that I was an immoral widow who had tried to seduce her late husband's brother. The accusation was devastating and completely false. But in our village's patriarchal culture, a woman's denial meant nothing against a man's accusation. I tried to defend myself, explaining that Mahmoud had assaulted me and I had rejected him, but no one believed me. Village culture assumed women were naturally deceptive and that men's word was more trustworthy. The matter was brought before village elders, who served as informal court under Taliban-influenced interpretation of Islamic law. I was not allowed to testify fully or present evidence. Mahmoud claimed I had initiated sexual contact. Several male relatives supported his story, motivated by family politics and their own interests in discrediting me. On August 1, 2018, the elders announced their verdict. I was guilty of attempted adultery and immoral behavior. The punishment under their interpretation of Islamic law was stoning to death. The sentence would be carried out in 2 days as public warning to other women about maintaining moral behavior. I was locked in a room to await execution, paralyzed with terror. I was 26 years old and would be stoned to death for rejecting a sexual assault, because village justice believed men over women and punished female victims rather than male perpetrators. On August 3, 2018, I was taken to the village square for execution. A crowd had gathered, men, women, children, to witness the stoning. In our village's brutal justice system, public executions served as warnings to others. I would be made an example of what happened to women accused of sexual immorality. I was forced to kneel in a shallow pit dug specifically for stonings. My hands were bound behind my back. The village mullah read the charges against me and declared that Islamic law demanded my death for attempting adultery. He invited village men to participate in the stoning, framing it as religious duty and community justice. The terror was overwhelming. I knew what was coming. I had witnessed stonings before in our village. I would be pelted with rocks until I died from the injuries. The process was brutal and could take minutes or hours depending on how quickly fatal injuries occurred. There would be no mercy, no last-minute rescue, no appeal. The first stones struck me while I was still processing the reality of what was happening. Pain exploded as rocks hit my head, shoulders, back. I tried to protect myself, but my bound hands made it impossible. More stones came from multiple directions as men in the crowd participated enthusiastically in what they viewed as righteous justice. I lost track of how many stones hit me. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. Some were small rocks causing painful bruises. Others were larger stones that broke bones and caused severe trauma. Blood poured from wounds on my head and face. I felt ribs crack from impacts to my torso. The pain was unimaginable and unrelenting. At some point, I collapsed forward, unable to remain kneeling. The stoning continued as I lay on the ground. Stones struck my prone body, my head, my back. Blood pooled around me. I was dying. I knew this with certainty. The injuries were too severe, the bleeding too extensive. I would not survive. Eventually, the stoning stopped. I don't know if it was because I appeared dead or because the crowd had exhausted their bloodlust. I heard voices discussing whether I was still alive, whether more stones were needed to ensure death. Someone checked for breathing or pulse, though I was too broken to know what they found. The crowd began dispersing. In our village's practice, those who died from stoning were left where they fell for several hours as continued warning before being buried. I was abandoned there in the village square, bleeding and broken, expected to die soon if I wasn't already dead. The pain was beyond description. Every part of my body screamed with agony from the impacts and injuries. I couldn't move, couldn't call for help, couldn't do anything but lie there bleeding and waiting to die. The physical trauma was catastrophic. Head injuries, broken bones, internal bleeding, countless wounds. But worse than the physical pain was the injustice and abandonment. I was dying for a crime I hadn't committed, killed by people I had known my entire life, punished for being a victim rather than the perpetrator being held accountable. I had no hope of rescue or justice. I would simply bleed to death in that square as the village went about its business, satisfied that honor had been restored through my execution. As I lay dying in the village square, drifting in and out of consciousness from blood loss and trauma, something extraordinary happened. I saw a figure of light approaching me, a man dressed in brilliant white, radiating peace and compassion that contrasted sharply with the violence I had just experienced. At first, I thought I was hallucinating from the head injuries or that this was death coming for me. But the figure was too real, too present, too distinctly other than anything I had experienced. He knelt beside me in the blood-soaked dirt, and when he looked at me, his eyes held infinite compassion and sorrow for my suffering. He spoke to me, and I understood him despite never having heard his voice before. He said, "Laila, I see you. I know you are innocent. I am Jesus Christ, and I have come to heal you and save you from this death." His words were in Dari, my language, but carried weight and authority beyond normal human speech. I was confused and frightened. I had been raised Muslim and knew little about Jesus except that he was a prophet in Islam, someone who had lived centuries ago. But this figure claimed to be Jesus himself, present with me now, offering healing and salvation. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming even through my dying haze. Jesus reached out his hand and touched my head where stones had struck, causing severe bleeding and trauma. As he touched me, I felt warmth spreading through my body, not the burning heat of fever but the gentle warmth of life and healing. The excruciating pain began to lessen slightly, not disappearing but becoming more bearable. He told me that he loved me, that he had seen everything that happened to me, that he knew I was innocent of the charges that led to my stoning. He said that what was meant for evil and injustice, he would turn into testimony of his power and compassion. He promised that I would not die from these injuries but would live to tell others about his healing mercy. I wanted to believe him, but the physical evidence suggested otherwise. I was catastrophically injured, bleeding extensively, lying abandoned in a village square with no medical help available. Death seemed inevitable regardless of supernatural promises. How could I possibly survive injuries this severe in rural Afghanistan with no hospital access? Jesus seemed to read my doubts. He told me to have faith, that his power was greater than my injuries, that healing didn't depend on human medicine but on divine intervention. He said that my survival would be impossible to explain naturally, that people would have to acknowledge something supernatural had occurred, and that this testimony would reach people who needed to know he was real and powerful. Then he did something that changed everything. He placed both hands over my heart and spoke words I didn't fully understand but that resonated in my soul. "Be healed in my name. Live and testify to my glory." The warmth I had felt in my head spread throughout my entire body, flowing through me like gentle fire that brought life rather than destruction. After Jesus spoke those words and touched me, something began happening that I couldn't explain medically or naturally. The bleeding that had been pouring from my head wounds slowed and then stopped. The excruciating pain from broken ribs and internal injuries lessened to a dull ache. The sensation of dying, the cold, the weakness, the fading consciousness, reversed, replaced by growing warmth and strength. I don't know how long I lay there in the village square after the vision of Jesus. Time became strange and fluid. But gradually I became aware that I was still alive when I should have been dead. The catastrophic bleeding had stopped. The pain, while still present, was no longer overwhelming. I could breathe more easily despite the rib injuries. As afternoon turned to evening, a village woman, not someone I knew well, approached cautiously to check if I was dead yet. She gasped in shock when she saw me breathing and conscious. She called for others, and soon several women surrounded me, amazed that I was still alive hours after a stoning that should have killed me. They carried me to a nearby home, not knowing what else to do with a condemned woman who had somehow survived execution. No one wanted the responsibility of nursing me, but leaving me to die openly in the square had become problematic now that I was obviously still alive. Over the following days, my survival became increasingly miraculous and inexplicable. Wounds that should have become infected and killed me began healing cleanly. Broken bones set themselves without medical intervention. Internal bleeding that should have been fatal stopped on its own. I grew stronger each day rather than weaker, defying all expectations. The village was bewildered. They had conducted stonings before and knew what injuries like mine meant. Certain death within hours or days at most. Yet I was healing at a rate that made no medical sense, especially without access to hospitals or modern medicine. People whispered that something supernatural had occurred, though they couldn't agree on what. I told no one about my vision of Jesus during those early days. I was still processing what had happened and was terrified of being accused of blasphemy or further religious crimes. But privately I knew that Jesus had healed me just as he promised. The medical impossibility of my survival was testimony to his intervention. After 2 weeks, I was able to walk and function somewhat normally despite lingering pain and scarring. The physical evidence of the stoning remained. Scars on my head and face, damaged ribs that ached, bruising that covered my body. But I was alive when everyone, including me, had been certain I would die. My survival created complicated situation. Under the village's justice system, I had been executed for my crimes. Yet here I was, alive and recovering. Some interpreted this as God's will, that Allah had spared me, suggesting perhaps I was innocent after all. Others remained convinced of my guilt and viewed my survival as troubling anomaly in what should have been straightforward execution. Mahmoud, who had falsely accused me, was furious that I had survived. My continued existence threatened his story and his reputation. He began spreading rumors that I had used witchcraft to survive the stoning, turning my miraculous healing into evidence of further crimes. Within a month of the stoning, I knew I had to leave my village. My miraculous survival had made me subject of suspicion and controversy. Some viewed me as divinely protected and therefore innocent. Others saw me as a threat who should have died. Mahmoud and his allies wanted me silenced permanently. I made contact with an underground Christian network that operated secretly in Afghanistan, helping converts and persecuted believers. When I told them about my vision of Jesus and my miraculous healing, they wept and praised God, saying he had performed a great miracle to save me and reveal himself. They helped arrange my escape from the village in September 2018. The journey was dangerous and required traveling through Taliban-controlled areas, but the Christian network had experience moving people secretly. Within weeks I was out of Afghanistan entirely, relocated to a country offering asylum to persecuted believers. Today I work with organizations helping Afghan women who have experienced similar violence and abuse. My testimony about surviving stoning through Jesus' miraculous healing resonates powerfully with women who have suffered under brutal interpretations of justice. Several have come to faith after hearing that Jesus appeared to me when I was dying and healed injuries that should have killed me. My physical scars remain, visible reminders of the stoning on my face and head, chronic pain from broken bones that healed imperfectly, psychological trauma from the violence. But these scars have become part of my testimony. When people ask about them and I explain how I received them and how Jesus healed me despite their severity, the evidence on my body validates the miraculous nature of my survival. I have no contact with my family or village. They consider me dead, either spiritually through apostasy since my Christian faith became known, or preferably actually dead since I was supposed to die from the stoning. My continued existence is embarrassment and problem they want to ignore. The grief of that permanent separation is real. I lost my homeland, my family, my culture, and everything familiar. The cost of following Jesus, whom I first encountered when I was dying from unjust execution, included losing all earthly connections and becoming a refugee with only my faith and my testimony. But Jesus gave me something worth more than anything I lost. He gave me life when I should have died. He healed me when medical survival was impossible. He revealed himself to me when I was abandoned and condemned. He proved that his compassion extends to Afghan women whom brutal justice leaves bleeding and broken. I was stoned and left for dead at 26, certain I was dying from catastrophic injuries in August 2018. But Christ appeared to me in that village square, touched my broken body with healing power, and saved my life in ways that defied all natural explanation. My survival is medical impossibility that doctors who have examined me cannot explain through normal healing processes. I carry scars from the stones, but I also carry testimony that Jesus Christ heals even those whom human justice has condemned to die. He saw my innocence when no one else would believe me. He provided supernatural healing when no medical help existed. And he transformed my death sentence into testimony of his miraculous power and compassion that continues reaching others who suffer injustice and need to know that Jesus sees them, believes them, and has power to heal even the most broken.